I'm Ryan from the Dad.io podcast, a show dedicated to dorky dads everywhere. Part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other dad-alicious geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Talk hard and enjoy the mindgasm. The intellectual podcast starts now.
That's right. The Intellectual Podcast starts right now. I'm your host, David S. Dawson, and with me today is none other than Larry Nemecek, Dr. Trek. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thank you. The intellectual with an X.
That's right.
You need to have that in your...
I found it on, what's the website where you go for slang definitions? I forget the name of it right
Urban
now.
Dictionary or something?
Urban Dictionary. I went to Urban Dictionary, and intellectual with an X is a conversation between two people that's intellectually stimulating to the point of intellectual orgasm.
Okay.
So I was like, that sounds like a good name for a podcast.
Intellectually, that's a high bar, though. Boy. Okay.
Well, it'll be easy bar with a guest like yourself on the show today.
So. Okay. I'll try to get my intellectualism up to an X level then. Okay.
Well, the thing for me is it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. I had the honor of sharing the stage with you at Comic-Con this past year on a podcasting panel.
Mutual, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it turns out we have a mutual friend in Neil Halford, and I never thought I'd get to actually meet Larry Nemecek, who's been working on the Con of Wrath with Neil for as long as I've known him.
Yeah, for 47 years. No, actually, yeah. Well, that's one thing. I had a donor come through here recently, and we're actually working on the major edit and have a plan. We have a plan and actually money to put it into action to get things wrapped up.
Excellent.
My documentary there. So,
just for our listeners' sake, can you give us a little bit of background on the Con of Wrath and how long you guys have been trying to get that together and done?
Well, the Con of Wrath is, which I think is a cute title, but it's not mine. It's the real life story of the biggest event. Well, I say in 1982. The year that the Wrath of Khan, the Star Trek, the second movie, with Ricardo Montalban, that a lot of people
the best Star Trek movie.
I was going to say what many people say is still the best. It's certainly the bar that all Star Trek movies are measured against.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and what producers aspire to, sometimes to their peril. But it's like 2 weeks after that, this group in Houston, and this is only 10 years into the Star Trek convention era, which really is the era that led to all the big Comic-Cons today, because Star Trek science fiction fans had been meeting in conventions and had meetups to get together since the 30s, at least, with First Fandom. But sci-fi conventions had always been about authors and artists and never about media, TV and movies, because, to be blunt, they were usually crap. And then you had the rare, gems that easy to remember. Oh, Forbidden Planet, and oh, Day the Earth Stood Still, and oh, Twilight Zone. But most of the time, sci-fi was the B movies and the bug-eyed monsters and all that. And most sci-fi fans, when they're thrilled to get one like that, over the years used to be able to, roll their eyes and talk about, well, you've got to go back to the classics because who can trust, media to do that? Well, that started to change. With actual, and Twilight Zone was a notable exception. It was an anthology series, right? So, but you could just, for every Star Trek there was a Lost in Space or a Captain Video or whatever, or even Flash Gordon, and however they started, when they got to screen they were just atrocious. Even though fondly remembered, if you're 8, but atrocious if you're an adult.
Well, there's a serious amount of camp involved in all of them.
Well, right. If you can even intellectualize it that far, even, But Star Trek was kind of the beginning of the change, and Star Trek was such a pioneer for everything aside from itself on a meta level. Everything that we had, this world we live in today, where we're drenched in superheroes and sci-fi, and Comic-Cons are not something that keep you in the closet. They're what lets you out of the closet. There is no more closet because there are dollar signs attached to everything, and cities compete to have you come in and bring in the tax revenue, Whereas, 20 and 30 years ago, you could barely beg your way into getting somebody to take a science fiction convention seriously. So Star Trek was the pioneer of all that, even as it's kind of been in fallow times lately until here recently with the comeback now. So, but in 1982, on its own level, Star Trek was having a great ride, and The Wrath of Khan was bringing a lot of attention, starting to make baby steps toward mainstream acceptance. But you were still very much in the sci-fi in the closet, if not among your tribe, you were fine. But it had only been 10 years since that first New York Star Trek convention kind of started the revolution. And It was a really wild, the world of conventions and promoters and all that was still a pretty wide open Wild West. And I'll say a colorful characters came up with an idea in Houston, not just to have talks and Q&A and autograph sessions and the standard trappings, but to have Star Trek's first, and really pop culture's first big arena show, basically. The first big rock concert for Star Trek, and by extension sci-fi. And It was called The Ultimate Fantasy, and they were going to have the whole cast come together, which had been attempted once or twice and been off by one body. It wasn't even going to be, there was a regular convention going on that they had every year, their big Houston privately run convention called Houston Con. But this was going to be a literal arena show. It was going to be in the old Summit Arena where the Houston Rockets used to play ball, where all the traveling, musicals and rock concerts would come to. And they literally rented it out and then thought they sold tickets enough to have 3 shows at 18,000 seats apiece.
Wow.
As an adjunct to this convention. And, had back then, before the internet, had Starlog magazine was the big sci-fi Bible in the way you knew what was going on.
I remember Starlog.
Yeah, full page ads in Starlog. And I was, I grew up in early adulthood in Oklahoma, around Oklahoma City and Norman. And that's where I saw it there. And it was like 8 hours down I-35 to Houston and branch over. And I went down with a couple of my friends. So the bottom line here is that we didn't know it at the time, and we sure didn't know it later on. But at the time, we had no idea that for all this, all these great plans, that the show was not quite going to go the way it was planned, and we had it was kind of a debacle of a weekend, and we got through it, and then flash forward to 2010, and I'm at a convention after party, and I heard a guy talking about the Con of Wrath. I should say I heard people talking about the Houston Con that year and the Ultimate Fantasy, a.k.a. the Ultimate Fallacy, a.k.a. the Ultimate Fuck Up, the Ultimate, and most of all, the Con of Wrath, which someone named it that weekend long enough where some button makers in the dealer's room were making "I Survived the Con of Wrath" buttons.
Hilarious.
And so anyway, I met a guy just a few years back that was talking about being there, and I heard him, and I said, "Oh, you were there?" And he says, "I was the tech director for the stage." And at the time, I was really, it seemed like an eternity ago now, but I was really trying to find another way. Star Trek was already in the fallow years after Enterprise was canceled in 2005.
Right.
And the JJ movies had started up, but they were, an alternate universe, and they were movies, and they were only 2 or 3 years, and we still weren't back into full-blown, Trek production, even while everything else was exploding around us. And I thought, a light bulb I met this guy, and a light bulb just went off, one of the biggest ones I've ever had, that, oh my God, this needs to be preserved. No, this needs to be preserved, just not audio recordings. Like I've interviewed, I've been a journalist and a theater-trained actor for years and worked in news and authored books, and then got, leveraged that into getting a licensed book done for The Next Generation. I wrote the book called The Next Generation Companion that thousands and thousands of people bought. It was like the biggest selling Star Trek nonfiction book in ages. And then it was probably topped by the Star Trek Encyclopedia, but those remain kind of the biggest 2 books in licensed official publishing history. But I come from that background and had a front row seat. We moved to LA and all that, but I had never done anything in media. And when I was talking to this guy, as things were retrenching a little bit there, and I was wondering where to go next, I thought, no, don't just audio interviews, get this on camera. And then I thought, archive it. And then I thought, no, because we're in a visual world here, he said in 2010.
Right.
And then I thought, nope, you know what? I've been looking for something to do. Hell, I can do this. We can do this as a documentary. I'd met some people that had done very, not low budget, but they'd found a way to do documentaries without spending a ton of money if they'd stretched it out. Just them and a camera and maybe one other person.
Right.
And that's the path I started on. So the Con of Wrath started with him. I wanted to have some celebrities, but I knew it wouldn't be just celebrities. It would be the fans and the dealers and all. Because the thing about that weekend was that it was amazing to me in hindsight to me it was like a Phoenix Rising story. Or it was like a riches to rags to riches, because the show did go on. I've known of other convention type events that blew up on the promoters. Sometimes it should have, unfairly on the fans. But this was kind of, if not the first one, at least from the height of like a golden era, and before everything got so, internet web driven, before we had 24/7 media, before we had social media, the internet, we knew everything before it happened. And the minute something did happen, it was tweeted and posted all around the world. And it was just a simpler, gentler time in 1992. Let me say that. But I just thought it was also kind of a forerunner of the world of today. So I was really intrigued on how much things have changed, but also how things have not changed at all. With fans and with celebrities and with the middlemen and with organizers and with the dealers and everybody involved in the community. And what was amazing about that weekend that was different than anything that I knew about so afterwards was that no matter what happened, every circle, the actors, the professional guests, the fans, the organizers, and the dealers, primarily, those circles, everybody kept the thing going. It didn't collapse in a day, like on a Friday, for a few hours and then go. They followed the script all 3 days and actually struggled to Sunday, and then everyone went their ways and were changed forever. No. Well, maybe in some ways. So anyway, that all and then along the way, some threads that I wanted to talk about in how much things have changed and how much they haven't. So that's the Con of Wrath. And I said I wouldn't, if I needed at least Walter Koenig, who kind of saved the day among the tech side of things, and Harv Bennett, the late great Harv Bennett, who was the producer of most of the original series movies from 2 through 5. And who brought in Nick Meyer, that saved the Wrath of Khan and saved this show. He got all the actors to stay because he was worried about how if it got out to the press, what a meltdown would look like to Paramount and to Star Trek, which it just was only about 2 weeks into the box office of the Con of Wrath, and didn't want anything to throw mud on that. To blow that out.
You absolutely don't want negative press going out in the midst of some of the best press Trek ever got.
Right. And again, at the time, there's no internet, so it was totally going to be news and traditional news and TV, radio, and fan buzz to some extent. So, but when I started this, I thought, okay, I need some of them. I don't need about all of them. And of course, by this time, Dee Kelly and Jimmy Doohan, McCoy and Scotty, and had passed away, and Merritt Buttrick. And they wound up with everyone, including Kirstie Alley and Merritt Buttrick, except for Leonard Nimoy. But then not for lack of trying, and not for Leonard Nimoy trying in the end, which was a side story in itself. So anyway, both Harv Bennett and Walter, I knew Harv and Walter and George and Nichelle would probably do it, and I didn't know about Shatner. But I thought, well, I don't need all of them. I just need a couple of them at least. And when Harv and Walter both said, oh, not just yes, but hell yes, then I went, okay, we're fine. And then I wound up getting George and Nichelle. Thank goodness we got to Nichelle. We did, because her health has been going down lately. But
right.
And Laura Banks, who was one of Khan's girls, who was at the show that weekend. And I'm gonna still to make an inroad to Shatner, and I've talked to Kirstie's manager once, who was interested. I just need to circle back, but I've got most of the. And then we had Kara Quinn, who was the publisher of Starlog, who was there, and people. And we have Wendy Doohan, Jimmy Doohan's widow, talks, and among that level. But then we've also got all the organizers, most of whom still are in Houston, and tons of fans all over the country. and a ton of dealers, some of whom are still on the con circuit, which is, I decided I could almost do a documentary someday. I want to call it Connies instead of Carnies, and have it be all these dealers that have been out on the vendors that have been on the dealer circuit, on the convention circuit since the 80s and before. So
that'd be a fascinating film.
So then the last few years, I knew content I was good in my DP, but I didn't know about landing it. And now the last year or two, and I've had a guy who's going to edit it, but I just didn't know about money and where to go. And of course, in the last 8 years, we've had a revolution in the back end of things,
right?
Starting with Netflix and on and on and on. So anyway, now we've got the last year or so finally, and I knew it was going to be slow motion. So it wasn't like, oh, here's a 9-month funded documentary cycle, we're going to churn it out, in a year or whatever. I always knew it was going to be like a shade tree process.
Well, I think that's one of the great things about documentaries is they're oftentimes passion projects of the filmmaker themselves. Like they just have an obsession to tell that story. And for me as an outside observer, like knowing about this documentary for so many years, I'm really anxious
Neil, of course,
to see it.
Neil being my DP. Yes.
Yeah. And Neil's fantastic. He's been on the show a couple times. And he's talked a bit about, working on the film as well. So
yeah, he's got other things going now, but I mean, and as do I. One thing that's interesting was this was going to be my sanity project to, hey, look, world, I can do this. Well, what's interesting is since then, my world has changed. The media landscape has changed big time.
Right.
It keeps evolving, and my own world has multiplied here now with some of the other things that I'm doing, still all with a foot in Star Trek, hopefully. So,
well, what are all the various Trek projects you have running?
Yeah,
so you're on a couple podcasts, right?
I have. Well, yes, in podcast world, one of the things about that same time, within a year of starting this, 2011, 2012, I got acquainted with a guy, Chris Jones, or C. Brian Jones, on Twitter, he's an expat American from Alabama, loves college football too, but he's lived, got married, and now separated in Japan, had a family, but is very much grounded there and works in journalism, but he's located in Japan, not Tokyo per se. He's about 2 hours out of Tokyo. But he founded a podcast and it's now grown into a network called Trek FM. And his original podcast, The Ready Room, which, there's a podcast for every Trek series, and he was hosting a lot of them. And the last 2 or 3 years' work and some health issues that he's now gotten through, but he's really trained up an army of a dozen or so podcasters. Some are still with him, some are doing other shows, but they've got a show for every Star Trek series, and they talk about the music and the book world and the comics world and the fan film world and the anthropology side of things and the psychological side of Trek, and it's kind of amazing. The animated and the Saturdays version of Trek and the landscape of the 70s. And I was a guest on his flagship show, The Ready Room, for a long time, and still am occasionally. But at the time I thought, he would come back and say, "Wow, Larry, your shows, come back anytime. Let's have you on, because when you're on is our highest downloads." And that's our highest count. I was like, okay, I should probably be doing this myself, but I don't want to just pile on, So I thought, well, I'm going to hang back and I'll just guest on other people's and, soak up that exposure and promotion and experience. And then at some point I'll do my own, but if it needs to be something a little different. So back in my head, I was always going to do a video, whatever. Well, that was 8 years ago. Now they're out there. But a couple of years ago, the Roddenberrys, Gene Roddenberry's son Rod, as they have tried to figure out what to do with their lives and what his company would do now, started a podcast, which has now grown into a small network and growing. Roddenberry Podcast Network, and past the flagship and a couple others that came over to them. They came in with the idea to start what's now called the Trek Files, which is going through Gene's papers. I mean, a lot of things are in at the UCLA Library Archives, like scripts and notes. But he has a lot of things like correspondence and memos and still script notes and things. And a lot of unseen stuff from the 70s, the movies that didn't get made or almost got made. And,
it's a fascinating show.
We're going through that. And it's only 15, 20 minutes. So I still have an idea for a video show I want to do that we're going to work on. But it's 15, 20 minutes only. It's not like an hour and a half like everything else I've been a part of. And it's great. It was a great opportunity. And I love working with it. And it's it's regular as rain every Tuesday. We're in the middle of a month hiatus, but we've, churned out 2 seasons, 24 episodes a season, and we have 48 in the can now. And guests. So I've been able to access the people I have known over the years, and we've got not just, and I love all the podcasts. People are podcasting from where they are. But we've had Doug Drexler and Dorothy Fontana and Bijo and John Trimble, who were the original fans that saved the show, and well, I'm leaving people out. Lisa Klink and
yeah, it's a really fantastic show. If anybody listening to this show hasn't heard it, make sure you're listening to the Trek Files. I only recently started listening myself, and I've gone back and listened to everything from this season, and I'm halfway through the first season now. And
well, you don't have to. I mean, I'm glad you don't have to say that just.
I'm having an absolute blast listening to it, especially the TNG stuff, because that's my Trek. I was in junior high when TNG debuted, and Wesley Crusher was me on screen.
Okay.
And I love the Wesley Crusher character, and listening to the discussions you guys.
You were not one of the Wesley haters.
I was definitely not a Wesley hater. I mean, Will Wheaton was in Stand By Me, and I recognized the character he played in that. Gordy was the character I related to, and then when he's suddenly on Star Trek as Wesley Crusher, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a kid on this show who I feel akin to, and it really made a huge impact for me. That it was okay to be smart, and it was okay to be kind of awkward and nerdy, and that you could still do amazing things in the world. For me, it was wonderful. I didn't know all the backlash about Wesley until much, much later when I started reading Will Wheaton's blog. I was like, oh my God, that's horrible.
Poor kid. Yeah, well, I remember. Well, I remember at the time, knowing that the character, as a character in a show, not as a role model maybe, but as a character in the show, was a little problematic. I knew some of the, means, even pre-internet. But my whole point was well, you bozos, if you don't like it, he's a 16-year-old kid. It's the writers writing the role. Right. That's where your problem is. And, and you could. Now we have the Chaos on the Bridge documentary, and we know what, I did my book in '92, and it was a licensed book, and I was determined not to have it be in fact, Ira Bear and Ron Moore, both, one of them, I remember Ira said, don't go vanilla because it's licensed, right? He's like, don't go vanilla. And I remember Ron Moore saying, don't go Pravda. So I couldn't get into. Some people didn't want to talk. It was so soon after all the craziness of the first couple of years in the writers' room with Next Generation. And if you hadn't seen the documentary Chaos on the Bridge that Shatner did, which was finally getting some of this on camera, and I guess the statute of limitations personally had run out, I guess, for people, so they finally got this down. But anything like that in my book, even that close to the actual events, if people didn't want to go there, I at least said there were creative issues. I mean, I didn't just paper over the reason for things.
Right.
But yeah, the first couple of years were insanely crazy for a host of reasons. And but poor Will. But even at the time, my point is, I'd say, Jesus Christ, you can see the credits changing every other week on the show. It's like, yell at the writers. Don't yell at him. But anyway, did you hear the episode of the Trek Files where we a couple of them I think have actually made news. We dug out the original version, the format for the Next Generation had Gene not wanting to get involved because he died 6 years later. His health was already going down a little bit, but we found the original like all Klingons, all Federation format of Next Generation that really sounds like it was developed in the movie era. Like it sounds like it was right out of a few years past, 20 years after the mid 70s or the mid 80s, after Voyage Home and all of that, where you were with the 80s Trek movies. And if you haven't heard that, it's fascinating. They had a complete format and pilot outline and a season outline set up, and then Gene saw it and was like, oh no, I'm going to come back and do the show. And then what we got was what we got. But to find this kind of preserved in amber and realize that probably only 6 or 8 people saw it back in the day,
and that's the thing. As a film and television person myself, the stuff you're pulling out and kind of discovering things that normal people don't get to see, these actual documents of the development of these projects, because everybody backseat directs,
or the non-development.
Everybody backseat directs the Trek world, the Star Wars world. Like everybody's got their opinion, but to see these documents of the communications back and forth between the producers and the writers and the disagreements, and to even fathom how anything makes it to screen sometimes is just, it's incredible. And it's such a fascinating show as a fan, as a filmmaker, as a nerd. I get such a kick out of every episode because there's so much to consume with it.
As a media watcher. Well, and John Champion, who is the co-host of Mission Log and is a Trek pundit in his own right to a lot of extent. He's my go-to, and he produces the show. He's there with me, so it's the two of us. He's the tech backbone for it, but he's my go-to guest. But apart from John, the guest line is I try to make sure it's always someone who got a paycheck from Trek. So I love my podcast world community. There are tons of people I could have on. Even other, and someday I may stretch that to Star Trek authors, but there are so many Trek authors especially nonfiction who worked on the show, and that's why they did their books. But Renee Echeverria was another guest who came to Next Generation and did DS9, and now has gone off in the media world. But it's in my other passion project that I'm growing right now, which is Portal 47, that I want to talk about in a minute. But the idea for everything, I have this banner called Trekland, because at one point somebody said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm an author, I'm an editor, I'm a host, I'm an interviewer, I'm an archivist, I'm an actor sometimes.
Multi-hyphenate.
Yeah, multi-hyphenate. But before I knew to say multi-hyphenate, and after I was worried about seeming like, jack of all trades, master of none. And I finally started saying, well, I work in Trekland, and I do have a degree in journalism. I do have a degree in theater. And that's where Trekland came from. And Dr. Trek goes back. It was just a joke thing I did when we were doing our newsletter of our club. And I had a column, and it turned into very quickly me just giving the upcoming lineup from Next Gen from the publicity people. Because I worked at a newspaper and I had it like 2 months ahead of everybody else. But I just had a column called Ask Dr. Trek, and I come back to that. I've embraced that instead of running away from it, which is all my marketing friends are like, no, this is great. I'm like, I can't say that. That's too throw. And now I get it. Now I understand that it's like when you're in a Chiron box and you need a second line, or you're in a grid in a program guide in a convention, you got Larry Nemecek. Dr. Trek just kind of gets you most of the way there without all the hype.
Yeah, it's simple.
Yeah. But anyway, I one thing is, we have a great discussion with John, but at least half the shows or more, I do have a guest from real world Star Trek on. And I try to pull topics that apply to them. But for the audience's sake, and I don't know if you've detected this, what we always try to do is not just, if you're a Trek historian or if you're a fan and you're over a certain age and you remember the original series or the reruns or the Next Generation Origins, say you've just come along in the Fallow Times or the JJ verse or now with Discovery. What I always try to do is pull really fun documents, sometimes really historical. Not just scripts and script memos, but we have correspondence to Gene. We have letters that Gene wrote to people, from celebrities, from fans, from other people he's trying to do projects with. We've got like introductions and forewords to books he's written. We've got interviews that he did in in Penthouse. We've got, not Forum, in what was the Penthouse sci-fi magazine? I've gone blank. It's just been recently. There was an all science fiction, not adult leveled. I'm going to shoot myself. Anyway, we've got that they did, but like Galaxy, or it's not Galaxy, but anyway, we've got all this paper material from Gene, and not just Trek, but his work on the Lieutenant, his show before Star Trek, all the pitches we've got pitches from the 50s and early 60s that he did. We've got some of his notes and things from Have Gun Will Travel when he was on staff.
I found all of that stuff really fascinating because I didn't know any of that history about Gene.
The biggest,
so
he never won.
It's been a revelation for me.
He never won an Emmy, but he won a Writers Guild, peers award for one of his scripts for Have Gun Will Travel. But yeah, the shows that he did that made it, and the shows that he's pitched that didn't make it. And the 70s, the TV movies, the PAX movies, Earth 2, and all of those. But to me, it's, even if it's not Star Trek, it's telling you about Gene, and therefore it's telling you something about eventual Star Trek. The Quester tapes, and Quester, his humanoid looking for human answers, which was a prototype that became Data, but it was a shot and filmed movie. And then we've got the big movies in the 70s when the comeback for Trek was on. First, the God Thing, or these were all named later on, because everything for 10 years was Star Trek 2. No matter what it was, until the real even the motion picture was Star Trek 2 at first. But the God Thing and his own, and then when he was put aside, but he was still involved with what we now call Planet of the Titans. But it was and the animated series. And the animated series that almost came to be before the animated series on NBC Saturday morning that we remember. So all of these things, if they're not strictly about Star Trek, they're about Gene and his view of the world and his evolving view of the world coming through in something else. So if you're a Star Trek fan, you can see roots of Trek in all these through Gene. Yeah. Even if we found threads that affected... we found a phrase right out of a memo on Early Next Gen that directly applies to the pilots of Discovery. So, so that's the gems we found, because we want it to be not just for, we want anybody under 30 to tune in and that's a Trek fan to find something, or who's borderline, who's just a pop culture fan and goes, and gets a bigger picture of not just Star Trek, but of Gene and everything he's touched. And then maybe that comes full circle back to,
Yeah. Well, I think it's easy to kind of forget because everybody talks about how the studios create stuff, but behind the studios are the people who actually put pen to paper or type in today and come up with ideas and thoughts, and all the background that you guys are drumming up on Gene is fascinating to me because, those experiences kind of educate the person who then educates what the show becomes. And kind of this thread that I've been hearing for a little while on the Trek Files is this Gene growing into the great bird of the galaxy. And and when did he kind of start cultivating that himself? And,
the legend in his own mind, kind of
playing into that legendary status and stuff. And as a producer, I get how that kind of becomes important too, because that's how you get to start selling your projects, is by kind of believing your own hype a little bit, right?
And Star Trek was the biggest seller for him, and in the 70s, he was. See, at a meta level, the other part of the Trek Files is, and this is what I do with all my projects too. It's what's going to come through in the Con of Wrath, and it's a big part of Portal 47 too. But the other part is just being aware that everybody today, however old you are, if you're lucky enough to be older, you've lived through some of the turns in the tech and media landscape and celebrity and fandoms and just, the way things are delivered and the way we look at and how. And if you're younger, you're out of the, the anthropology of culture of how, in how it affects Star Trek and the way it's produced. So on a very basic level, the guys in the 60s show, the SAG, the actors, writers, directors being above the line and getting residuals. Well, you got an original run and you got 2 reruns, and that's all anything was covered, because it was, forget DVDs or VHS tapes.
Right?
You didn't have, syndication wasn't a big thing. So Star Trek is so cutting edge on the way ratings are measured, on the reusability of the media and the content, and it gets caught up on the cutting edge. It's got, it's right on the cutting edge, but it's on the losing side. All these actors, Gene on down, major production people, they got paid for 1 run and 2 reruns, and then the 70s comes along, syndication explodes that no one thought about or knew about in the 60s. They're all gods, and they can't pay their rent and mortgage.
Yeah,
you talk about Gene's college tour, and they're in that whipsaw effect, and then the motion picture comes along, and it's almost like when there's a strike, it's like affected. Strikes happen because the world has changed, and they're not getting paid for actors or writers or directors or whatever, and
right,
and then you think about the 80s and tapes, but now we've got disposable media, and residuals, and streaming, and what does that look like? And one of the meta levels of the Trek Files is helping, and the internet and social media and what I call paper and stamps fandom, and how, one of the things I've said all along here is how Star Trek, Rick Berman one time said porn and Star Trek are what built the internet. But Star Trek, I say, invented the internet with paper and stamps, because nothing had come along on a sustained level. You had a rock band, you had Rudolph Valentino or Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra or the Beatles, but nothing drove passion to a fan base to the degree and the sustained level that Star Trek did. It was the latest fad for the Monkees had a revival letter writing campaign too, but
right.
For a year. It didn't go on and on and on and build. In the 70s, Star Trek was bigger than it had ever been in the 60s. And then flash forward another generation, you had original series fans. There was the loud 10% yelling about Next Generation and hated it. Mm-hmm. But they didn't get the paradigm change. It's not just a show, it's a universe now. And the Next Generation numbers became way bigger than the original series numbers had ever been. So helping people see those changes in all the different layers of the cultural landscape, and speaking up for early. Now we're drowning in comiconicness, and it's like, it was Star Trek and those early media cons that changed the name of the game, and had what you're going to have actors and writers, not just the sci-fi authors here. Well, that's so shallow. It's like, no, it's a whole different kind of thing. And along the way, the science fiction on the screen got better and better and better. But
right. Well, we're in the midst of one of those major shifts and changes too, with Discovery being on CBS All Access. And personally, I love it. I get the complaints some people had of season 1. I'm really digging season 2.
Yeah.
But the one complaint I hear from more and more people is, I don't want to spend $8 a month just to watch Star Trek. And it's like, really, guys? Like, you pay $12 or $16 to go watch a movie.
What do you pay for your coffee every other day?
You get double the amount of entertainment in a month to watch Star Trek for half the price of a movie ticket. And these episodes look as good as anything in the cinema. But people just like to complain, I think, about new things and shifts in the way things are done. Personally, I love not having to sit through commercials during my trek. Like, it's nice. Well,
right. Well, they're rapidly. One of the things I do is I have a live. I should tell everybody I have a live Facebook show, 1:00 on Tuesdays Pacific on my Facebook Trek page. On my Trek, Larry Nemecek's Trekland is my Trek Facebook. That's the umbrella page. And I have one for Portal 47 and one for the Con of Wrath and all that. But on my Trekland page at 1 on Tuesdays, I have up to my target time is 45 minutes, and we do live Q&A with whoever's watching. But I have basically a little editorial, a little op-ed that I start with commentary, and then there's a ratings group that's trying to do internet ratings with their own metrics for all the digital shows that don't have Nielsen's. Their analytics, and I review the ratings there, especially vis-a-vis Discovery, and then we have Q&A. And but that's one of the themes coming through there is that I try to point out to people, connect the dots, is that we're about to explode. They've already announced a lot of other, we're back in the business of having it's the antithesis of, it's a movie every 4 years, if anything. Now we're back into having, even though they're short seasons, they're streaming seasons, we're back to having Trek all the time, everywhere, with all these the Picard series coming out and the Section 31 series coming out. And
I like that they're going to be short seasons, because I like that European model. You have less filler episodes, right? Everything's important.
Right. You've got less. The writers were exhausted in their seventh inning stretch to get through the year, kind of thing. But. And and a lot of the complaint, everything from buying to, I'm going to watch it for the 3 months, and then CBS All Access is a startup; it can't compare to Netflix's catalog. Well, of course, you're just around at the very beginning, but of course they want to maximize. I mean, one of the things to the 80s and 90s was this collision of commercialism and fanishness in Trek, and there's been a point where, whatever else its faults, the commercial world of Trek at the height of Enterprise, the alignment of the commercial side and what fans wanted was pretty, not in production so much, but like licensing world and things, was pretty much in alignment, because eventually the long process, whoever at Paramount and or CBS figure out that, if we make what the fans want, we'll probably make more money.
Imagine that.
And you get into an alignment there, and then we're back into colliding that again. But it's, the show was what it was because it had horrible, as I keep saying, had horrible birthing pangs. And if it had been anything else but Star Trek, the plug would have been pulled. Star Trek and launching a new service that the whole world was watching, they wouldn't have stuck with it and had it birth. So yes, it had a rough delivery, but it landed amazingly. And the second season was going to be, even with the ruffles they've had since then, even. It's so much better a show, but and all these new series they're launching will benefit from all that too. So,
I think it's funny. I think people forget the first season of TNG was really hit or miss.
Well, we've tried to point that out too. The first season, there's a joke that no Star Trek after the original, no Star Trek is worth really watching until the third season. So, to one degree or another. So, but Discovery is there faster. But then I said, well, we're in streaming now, so measure Discovery in dog years, or measure Discovery in streaming years. It's like the second season is already like 3 seasons of regular long form, old school. It's been through the mill to the point where it's like 2 regular years already. But no, those kind of things are like what I try to point out to people, and the audience is way savvier than even 10 years ago, thanks to the internet and 24/7, and we have so much behind the scenes material out there. But that's always been if you couldn't tell, that's been my favorite. I mean, I love the characters and shipping. We have all the little buzzwords for everything now. I like I like the characters. Are you a characters person or a background person? Well, I'm more a characters person. Well, now you're a shipper. And you have nothing to do with big, ugly ships at the coast. So vessels, but.
Well, I caught an interesting thing in I think it was the premiere of this season of Discovery. It was almost like a direct reaction to fan reactions that nobody knew who anybody was on Discovery outside of Michael. And Pike asks for a roll call on the bridge. I was like, there's writers paying attention to people's complaints.
Well, yeah. And again, there are a lot of things those writers wanted to do. The writers that wound up with the show by halfway through the first season knew what they wanted to do. They knew what they wanted to fix, or tweak or massage. I always liken it back to Wile E. Coyote on the Acme rocket shoes. It's like, he's still going forward, but is he really on top of the shoe, or are they dragging him along? And that's what and about the time he gets on top of the shoes is when he hits the cliff or runs over the cliff, So that's, this season people are like, oh my God, it's so much better this year. And I said, well, I've kind of been saying that for a year. That's obviously what's going to happen, because there's too many talented people and too many fanboys and fangirls on the staff for it to happen. It was just recovering from, going through, I say it's like being in a taxi driving from LA to New York, and your driver changes 3 times and the car never stops.
Right. Well, and it is like any other group activity, right? It takes a while for everybody to kind of sync together, get on the same rhythm, have the same vision, share that kind of direction that you're going, until everybody's in sync, kind of pulling in multiple places, and it doesn't quite gel right away. It takes time. All TV shows take a little bit of time,
but especially when your head writer or your driver or your pilot, changes 3 times in the first year or year and a half.
Right? That's really tough.
It's going to be especially stressful. Yeah. But anyway, that's what all that is, and that's what. And before we have to say bye here. Before all of that's what led me into 10 years of after Enterprise was gone, and Trek, I say, was in the fallow times in our community, in our world, and even the JJ movies bringing. I just knew. I said, okay, well, I hope it's good. I don't care about the format. It's like, to me, it's like, well, they're good stories about fake people, because are you going to flesh out this JJ verse, or this, now that it's the Kelvin universe timeline? Are you going to flesh this out and make it relevant, or is it just going to be 2 hours every? They finally did some comics, and some novels, but even then, what's on screen? Because I felt bad. I felt like, am I really to the cranky old man on the lawn stage of life? But there were a lot of other people who wanted, Trek people who really wanted. No one wishes the movies badly, but we just want our series back on TV in the Prime universe, because that's what everybody. There's 700 hours of that, and that's what's Star Trek's strength more than any other storytelling franchise out. Now we've got all these genre shows, from the start, Star Wars first. Yes, Doctor Who, but it took the Americans to show them how to market it. Right? Since the 80s and 90s.
Sacrilege. Don't say that.
No, I'm saying it has a
you're right.
history, but it was also in the DNA to change, after the first regeneration. It's got that whole generational thing, handled until they run out of absolute numbers, and now they have to change the canon on that. But my point is that all of and comic books have been around, but not at this insane degree. Thank you, CGI. Thank you, just media culture and internet and social media and all that. But Star Trek was the original granddaddy of showing everybody else how to write the book on fandom, on how to conduct studio fandom relations, or how not to, what celebrities of those things look like, what's expected in fandom, and TV and movies were different, and a movie cast for Trek was going to have to behave differently than a TV. All those things the last 10 years have been interesting to watch and kept it very fresh. So while I still love the tech heads, and I'm still a canonista myself and love the background, but behind the scenes and the making of is now in my wheelhouse and has been for a long time, and just watching these changes change. But for a long time there, I was wondering what I was going to do when there was no Trek actively going. I used to edit the National Magazine when that was a thing, and I want, should I just go sell shoes, and should I just go back to journalism and be part of a dying breed there, get laid off in Dead Tree Media, or get paid nickels for my words online, before the rule book was written. And people said, no, don't do that. You should take all the people and the stuff you saw and the things you have in your own collection and your own archive, and you should do something with that. And I'm like, well, what would that be? And it's like, well, I don't know. We're still writing the rule book. We'll tell you in a few years. Meanwhile, just starve a little. But no, the last 4 or 5 years, I started working with an entrepreneur coach, and my Portal 47 is basically trying to take advantage of the internet and the software and the apps and just the state of mind of where everyone is,
right?
And do, as I say, bring Star Trek fans who have no idea how much Star Trek they have no idea about, and bring them all these voices that they've never heard, even at conventions and in interviews and magazines and podcasts and things, and insights, and connect the dots of the business and the background world and the changing landscapes and the Star Trek they know and the Star Trek they never knew about, and bring all that together in a way that we can get to everybody, so that there is what I call a mini con all year long, no matter where their center seat is. And that's what Portal 47 is. So I debuted with an entry level, or the primary we call, and now I have a high level called Deck 1, a kind of a premium, a first class version called Deck 1, and I do Trekland Treks, day tours of film sites, day tours, and I have an event every once in a while, coming up here in February, President's Day weekend, called Away Days, which is kind of Trekland Treks on a schedule. So it's film sites around LA, just as a day or maybe 2 days. Very cool. And trying to find levels that can appeal to everybody, where I can have a business and I'm within the, the fair use, the nonfiction side of Trek here, but I still do my column in the official magazine, and I did an official book. We just updated it, a maps and book set called Stellar Cartography, which came out last fall again, and trying to explore doing some other official books, and then there's and then talk at conventions still and see fans there and bring some of this, trying to calm the waters, hear the legitimate complaints and criticisms, because they're still there, and I have mine with Discovery, but they're so passionate that every change hurts. But yeah, you can go back and see everybody who was screaming about Next Generation.
They screamed about Next Generation. They screamed about Deep Space Nine. They screamed about Voyager. I mean, every new show has its detractors. Enterprise, I think, suffered more than any of them.
Well, there were the faction that screamed about the Wrath of Khan for killing off Spock, and they heard about it early and had an actual organized marketing campaign and took a marketing survey and said, you will lose 28% of your box office and 37% of your licensee expected revenue if you leave Spock killed off.
Here we are.
Past spoilers. Yeah.
30-something years later.
How about the fandom clique that did not accept the third season of the original series because they thought Spock was bastardized? They were not accepting the third season, the Freddie Freiberger year.
This is why I wanted to talk to you, Larry, because you contextualize all of it. And it's wonderful to have somebody who's got such a wide-ranging knowledge of the history of all of this and can kind of let us all see it.
Well, that's what I've kind of fallen into. But I always still treasure the moments when you can have a little puddle and have a fanboy moment. So try to never let go of that too.
Well, it's a fanboy moment for me to have you on my show. Aww. So, thank you so much. I feel somewhat legitimized in my fandom now.
Oh yes, very much so. Yeah. Well, I always try to, my worst fear is when this Next Generation was coming on, and I would hear the loud 10% griping about it, and I'm like, shut up! It's been 20 years. We've got Trek back, and Gene is running it. Shut up! I was in my 20s and I wasn't a little kid, but I always remember that moment when we're sitting now through the current days with Discovery, and even though my gut and my heart may be going one place, I try to step back and remember the big picture until. And this too shall pass. And what can I offer those people who are pained? Yeah. The other new wrinkle of now is that we live in a bot and troll world, and there's all kinds of things that are being uncovered, way beyond politics. Gamergate and all of that. And not to open a new can of worms here, but there's a whole new level going on out there in social media that we're just beginning to grapple with, and good people that feel a little disheveled, a little in the gut, like, oh, is the world? There's a whole level going on affecting all ends of pop culture. And it's almost like a backhanded compliment that Star Trek, it's back because it's on the radar scope of bot and troll world and getting into that, and the Trek and their social justice warriors. And have you ever watched the series?
My dad made a point once, shortly before he passed away, that when we were all growing up, we were expecting the technology to advance for hover cars and, space travel and whatever else. But the reality is what we got was a massive communications evolution that most of us didn't anticipate and didn't see coming, and none of us are prepared for.
Much less the WGA and SAG contracts.
Right? So we're all just kind of stumbling through trying to figure out this new world we live in.
Where's my flying car and my jet? Yeah.
I think that would have been easier if we'd have just gotten those things.
Mid-air collisions have multiplied by 1,000, but
Well, since there's none right now, really, that's it's not that many.
We just collide online is what we do.
Yeah, now we virtually collide and hurt each other's egos more than anything.
Yeah.
So, Larry, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on. Yeah, we could go on. I started to say, I threw that out there at the risk of I know you're trying to get off. But
I could talk to you forever, but I do have to get to work too. So, I got to pay my bills. So we got to run. But I would love to have you back on again sometime down the road and chat again because I could talk to you forever. I mean, that's just really what it comes down to.
Sure thing. Well, I look forward to hopefully spread a little cheer here to your audience, and just LarryNemecek.com. Come visit me and drop by the Tuesdays at 1. and hopefully we're back February 19th with the Trek Files too, being new.
Awesome.
So,
hey, real quick question: are you going to go to Long Beach Comic Con?
I have not been since the first year, but I need to get over there. I'm not down I can't remember what time of year it is, but
It's in 2 days. It's in February. It's not in 2 days. It's in like 3 weeks.
Okay.
But there's a Star Wars fan film playing there, where I play Yoda.
Oh, awesome! Yoda.
I do the voice of Yoda in a Star Wars fan film, which you can actually see at StarWars.com right now. But
okay, right. See, they turned and embraced their fan films and made it a contest.
Yeah, it's interesting. We could have a whole episode just on that.
I didn't even mention Star Trek Continues, but I played McCoy in the first two, and I was a creative consultant for the whole series. And that's just
yes,
awesome.
You did.
Awesome experience and awesome product, and yeah.
I love fan filmdom. Let's do an episode of that down the road.
Okay.
We can just talk all about that.
Okay. I have a few insights on that and a couple others too. So.
I know you do, and I look forward to hearing them.
Okay. Anyway, David, thanks again.
Thank you, Larry.
Trek well.
Hello there, citizens. I am the terror that flaps in the night. I am the floaty that will not flush no matter how many times you try in the toilet bowl of crime. I am Darkwing Duck, telling you please, talk hard and enjoy the mindgasm. Whatever the heck that means. After all, you are watching Intellectual Podcast with your ears.